It was a quiet, ordinary morning in late April, but for BBC presenter Jill Dando, that day would mark her final moments. Jill was known across Britain as the warm, personable face of BBC News, a voice of comfort who shared stories from global events to community news. As she returned to her house in Fulham, London, she was suddenly struck down, her life ending in an instant on her own doorstep. In broad daylight, someone had killed her with a single close range shot to the head, a brutal and shocking act that would haunt Britain for years. The news of her murder spread like wildfire. Jill was more than a journalist to her viewers, she was part of their daily lives. Her death was felt as a personal loss by millions who had grown to trust her over the years, making this tragedy all the more painful. As the reality of the crime set in, questions about the motive and the person behind this chilling attack began to swirl. Who would want Jill dead? Why kill her in such a public and personal way? This wasn't just another news story. Jill's murder became a national obsession, drawing not only the attention of the public, but also the full force of the Metropolitan Police. An investigation like none other was about to unfold, but no one could predict the twists and turns, nor the dark mysteries that would emerge as detectives began their search for the killer. On that fateful morning, Jill Dando returned to her house on Gowan Avenue, a place she hadn't visited often in recent months. Her day was simple, a quick stop by her home before returning to her fiancé's place. But as she approached her front door, her calm routine turned into a horror no one could have anticipated. Just as she placed her keys in the lock, an unseen assailant seized the opportunity. Gripping her from behind, they forced her down, pressing her face close to the ground, and in a single chilling act, fired a shot directly at her left temple. The bullet struck with precision, taking Jill's life instantly. The calculated, almost surgical nature of the attack pointed to a killer who knew exactly what they were doing, someone cold and unhesitating. A neighbor heard a scream brief, abrupt, but no gunshot. Rushing to the scene, they found Jill lying on her doorstep, motionless. The killer had vanished in those short moments, escaping without a trace, leaving only the haunting image of Jill's last moments behind. The quiet Fulham street became a whirlwind of police and media, yet even with all eyes on the scene, the mystery of her death was just beginning. Following Jill Dando's murder, the Metropolitan Police launched Operation Oxborough, a large-scale investigation named for the meticulous and thorough approach detectives knew this case would demand. Jill was a beloved public figure, and her murder in broad daylight spurred an overwhelming response from both law enforcement and the public. Detectives sifted through countless leads, conducting interviews, and gathering witness statements, but every potential clue seemed to pull them in conflicting directions. The number of people questioned reached into the thousands, and detectives took over 1,000 formal statements, but the investigation moved slowly. Despite the intense media attention and nationwide appeals for information, identifying a primary suspect proved to be far from straightforward. Theories emerged suggesting motives ranging from revenge by someone she may have exposed on Crimewatch to the work of a deranged fan, but none held concrete answers. The police were left with a growing list of questions, and though leads continued to trickle in, tangible evidence was elusive. Operation Oxborough became one of the most high-profile yet frustrating investigations in the UK, and with each passing day, the mystery deepened. It became clear that finding Jill's killer would be no simple task. This was just the beginning of a long and winding road. As news of Jill's murder spread, attention quickly turned to her work on Crimewatch, the popular BBC show where she helped police solve real-life cases. Jill's role on Crimewatch made her a familiar face to both fans and criminals alike. Many wondered if her connection to the program, which had exposed countless crimes and suspects, might have put her in the crosshairs of someone seeking revenge. Crimewatch was designed to assist law enforcement by broadcasting appeals for unsolved cases and had a track record of helping capture dangerous individuals. Over the years, the show had certainly unsettled those with criminal ties, and some speculated that Jill may have unknowingly provoked a dangerous figure. Her work on the program put her in direct contact with cases involving violence, theft, and sometimes unpredictable individuals whose lives had been affected by the show's exposure. Detectives dug into this possibility, tracing Jill's involvement in high profile appeals and investigating if any cases she'd featured could have triggered a vendetta. But as they combed through the show's history and her past interactions, they found no concrete link. The theory was chilling yet elusive. Could this Crime Watch connection point to a motive, or was it a red herring? Investigators continued to weigh this possibility, but answers remained just out of reach. The suspicion lingered, however, casting a shadow over both Jill's work and the very nature of her murder. Months of investigation, dead end leads, and mounting public pressure weighed heavily on the police. Then, nearly a year after Jill's murder, attention shifted to Barry George, a resident of Fulham who lived close to Jill's home. George had a history of troubling behavior and incidents that caught the police's attention. Known as a loner with an unstable history, George had previously faced allegations involving stalking and was known for behaviors that bordered on the obsessive, including collecting magazines that featured Jill. George's background raised red flags. He had spent time in the Territorial Army, where he learned basic handling of firearms, and had an unsettling habit of following women in the area. Police found various pieces of evidence linking him indirectly to the scene, including a single particle of what forensic scientists initially claimed could be gunshot residue found in one of his coat pockets. While circumstantial, these details combined to paint a picture of someone who might fit the psychological profile of Jill's killer. As detectives dug deeper, they faced a dilemma. George seemed like a plausible suspect, but concrete evidence was scant. However, the mounting pressure to solve the case ultimately led to George's arrest in May of the following year. For the first time, detectives felt they had found their suspect, but doubts and unease lingered beneath the surface. Was Barry George truly capable of such a precise, calculated murder? Or were the pieces too fragile to hold the weight of this high-profile case? The case against Barry George centered on a tiny yet pivotal piece of evidence, a single particle found in his coat pocket, which forensic experts believed could be firearms residue from the gun used to kill Jill. This minuscule trace became a key piece of evidence, suggesting a link between George and the murder weapon. Given his proximity to Jill's home and his disturbing past, police saw this residue as a potential breakthrough and moved quickly, charging George with Jill's murder in the year following her death. Alongside the particle, detectives noted other peculiarities that, while not directly incriminating, seemed to support a possible connection. George had collected several copies of BBC's Ariel magazine commemorating Jill and was known for his erratic behaviors and claims of false identities. This odd mixture of forensic and circumstantial evidence seemed to point to a suspect whose unstable history aligned, at least on the surface, with the psychological profile detectives had been pursuing. The case was far from airtight, but with the public demanding answers, authorities pressed forward. Barry George's trial loomed, and with it, the hope of bringing closure to a case that had cast a shadow over Britain. Yet beneath the surface, some began to question. Was this single particle and George's background enough to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt? Or would the cracks in the evidence lead to even deeper uncertainties? In the summer of the year after his arrest, Barry George faced trial for the murder of Jill Dando. With the weight of public expectation pressing on the courtroom, George was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. The tiny particle of firearms residue, despite its microscopic size, became a linchpin for the prosecution. The jury ultimately deemed it enough to link him to the murder weapon, and combined with his history of disturbing behavior, the case appeared to reach a resolution. Yet, controversy surrounded this conviction from the start. Many, including legal experts and forensic analysts, questioned the reliability of the particle evidence, arguing it was too minimal and circumstantial to prove beyond doubt. Doubts surfaced about the forensic methodology itself, and with time, the residue was deemed inconclusive, a fragile piece of evidence on which to base a life sentence. Public opinion began to shift, with voices growing louder against the conviction, suggesting George might have been an easy target rather than the true culprit. With each passing year, questions mounted over whether justice had truly been served. The flimsy nature of the forensic evidence became a focal point of contention, and for many, it was clear the conviction had more to unravel than it had managed to resolve. Years after his initial conviction, Barry George's case was brought back to court under intense scrutiny. By now, the credibility of the single particle of firearms residue had been thoroughly challenged, with experts arguing that it was far too inconclusive to tie him definitively to Jill's murder. In light of this forensic reevaluation, his conviction was overturned, and in a retrial that spanned 8 weeks, George was formally acquitted of all charges. By the time he walked free, questions about the investigation's validity had not only resurfaced but intensified. George's acquittal cast the case back into the realm of the unsolved, reviving the mystery and sparking a fresh wave of speculation. The day Jill was killed, a handful of witnesses reported strange sightings near her home. One neighbor claimed to have seen a man walking away from the scene calmly just after the attack. This figure was described as a tall, white man in his 40s, though details beyond this were scarce. Around the same time, other bystanders reported spotting a dark-haired man running along the street and a Range Rover speeding away shortly after the murder. These sightings raised a perplexing question. Was the calm man casually strolling away the true killer, or was it the dark-haired man fleeing the scene in a hurry? While these descriptions tantalized detectives and the public alike, they ultimately remained just fragments of a puzzle with no clear solution. The potential witnesses offered glimpses of possible suspects, but with no way to confirm their identities. Each sighting blurred into a list of unresolved leads, complicating the investigation and leaving everyone wondering who, if anyone, had seen Jill's killer. As investigators analyzed the precise nature of Jill Dando's killing, a single point-blank shot to the head, they were struck by the method's chilling efficiency. The killer had approached Jill with practiced calm, shot her with a single bullet, and escaped the scene, leaving behind minimal evidence and almost no trace. This style of execution bore the hallmarks of a professional hit, a technique more common in assassinations than in crimes of passion or opportunity. Specialists pointed out that the gun, a modified 9mm short caliber semi-automatic, would have been difficult to acquire, suggesting that whoever orchestrated this attack had the resources and planning capabilities of someone in the criminal underworld. Yet, the glaring question remained: why would anyone target Jill? She was a public figure known for her work on the BBC and for her warm, approachable demeanor. Unlike controversial journalists or political figures, Jill had no known enemies or connections that would seem to warrant a professional execution. The idea that a hitman might be involved cast the case in a new, more sinister light, but without a clear motive, the theory was unsettlingly ambiguous, leaving detectives to wonder if they were dealing with a random act or something far more orchestrated. As speculation grew around the possibility of a professional hit, one theory began to take shape with chilling implications. Just weeks before her murder, Jill had taken part in a high-profile BBC appeal for Kosovan Albanian refugees affected by the ongoing conflict in the Balkans. This broadcast had reportedly angered certain pro-Serbian groups, many of whom viewed such humanitarian efforts as sympathetic to the Kosovo Liberation Army, an enemy in the region's civil strife. Some detectives and members of the press suggested that Jill's involvement in this humanitarian effort might have drawn the ire of powerful individuals connected to the Balkan conflict. Rumors circulated that a Serbian hitman could have been hired to silence Jill as a form of retaliation or intimidation, warning Western media and humanitarian voices against involvement in regional politics. Though this theory was never proven, it carried a grim logic, with Jill's assassination in broad daylight fitting the pattern of an organized hit. This line of inquiry, however, faced considerable skepticism. Other BBC journalists active in the region had not been targeted, and Jill's work, though public, was not investigative journalism that would directly provoke retaliation. Ultimately, while the Serbian hitman theory remained one of the most plausible explanations, it was also one of the most elusive. Without solid evidence tying her death to Balkan interests, this theory, like so many others in the case, left the public and detectives both grasping at shadows, wondering if they were closer to the truth or further from it than they realized. One unsettling theory investigators considered was the possibility of mistaken identity. Jill Dando was widely known across Britain, but she led a predictable, quiet life without personal enemies or controversial ties. The violent nature of her death, however, suggested a targeted act, prompting detectives to explore whether her murder had been intended for someone else, someone with a dark past, criminal connections, or powerful adversaries. Could her status as a public figure and her routine movements have placed her in the sights of someone who mistook her for another target? The idea wasn't implausible. Jill's prominence might have led a hired gun to believe she was more than she appeared. However, investigators struggled to find a concrete basis for this theory. No clear connections or cases of mistaken identity emerged that could link her life or her location to someone involved in organized crime or underworld vendettas. Despite its appeal as an explanation for the otherwise baffling crime, this theory ultimately left investigators with only more questions and no definitive answers. In the wake of Jill's murder, the police were flooded with tips and theories from a public eager to see justice for the beloved presenter. Every hint, rumor, and sighting, no matter how tenuous, was pursued in the hopes of cracking the case. Detectives followed numerous leads, ranging from anonymous callers to sightings of suspicious vehicles near her home, each lead holding a tantalizing hint of resolution. But as detectives dug deeper, each promising clue seemed to evaporate, leading them down dead ends and cold trails that ultimately left them empty-handed. Public theories grew wild, blending fact with fiction, and even the most plausible of tips ended in frustration. From suspects with no alibi to possible connections to criminal organizations, every theory seemed to dissolve under scrutiny. Operation Oxborough grew increasingly complex, yet no conclusive suspect emerged. The case, despite its high-profile nature, was edging closer to the dreaded unsolved status, and with each passing day, justice for Jill seemed farther from reach. As forensic experts analyzed evidence from the scene, they found that the weapon used in Jill's murder was highly unusual, a modified 9mm short caliber semi-automatic pistol. This type of weapon wasn't just rare, it was also incredibly difficult to source in the UK. The modifications, which included reducing the gun's muzzle velocity, suggested a level of sophistication that pointed to either an experienced gunsmith or someone with criminal underworld connections. This mysterious pistol left police wondering if tracking its origins could help pinpoint the killer. The question of who could have accessed such a weapon became central to the investigation, especially since legally obtaining or modifying firearms in Britain required both skill and access. Could the gun's rarity mean it came from the black market, or perhaps from an international source? Detectives pursued gun trafficking routes and conducted ballistics testing to trace its origins, but ultimately the weapon itself yielded no additional leads. This clue, like so many others, seemed poised to hold the key, yet it left investigators only with further frustration and no clear answers. At the start of the investigation, detectives considered whether Jill's murder could have stemmed from a crime of passion. Known for her warmth and approachability, Jill was admired by many, and it wasn't hard to imagine that she could have unknowingly attracted unwanted attention. Could a jealous suitor or spurned admirer have targeted her in a desperate act of violence? Police explored this angle carefully, questioning her friends, family, and colleagues, hoping to uncover any sign of personal conflict or troubled relationships. However, everyone close to Jill attested to her peaceful personal life. She had recently become engaged and was in a happy relationship, with no known history of obsessive admirers or strained romantic entanglements. Friends and family were certain that Jill hadn't been dealing with any issues related to unwanted attention or jealousy. This theory, while initially plausible, ultimately went nowhere. Jill's personal life was a testament to her positive relationships, and her murder continued to stand out as an enigma, seemingly without a personal motive. The Jill Dando investigation faced hurdles due to the limitations of forensic and surveillance technology at the time. In 1999, CCTV coverage was sparse and low resolution, making it difficult for police to track suspects near Jill's home or identify potential vehicles. Today, high-definition cameras and expansive surveillance networks could have provided far more coverage, potentially capturing a clearer image of Jill's killer. Advances in digital technology might also have allowed for facial recognition, giving investigators a much-needed lead. Forensic science was similarly limited. DNA analysis was still developing, and the trace particle analysis used in the Barry George case was prone to challenges and misinterpretations. Current forensic methods, including enhanced DNA testing and ballistic analysis, might have extracted more details from the crime scene, particularly regarding the modified weapon used. Modern tools could have illuminated evidence that was otherwise invisible, perhaps offering insights or even a direct lead. In hindsight, the lack of these technologies left the investigation with gaps that, if filled, might have drastically altered the case's outcome. Barry George's life following his acquittal was far from simple. Although he was legally cleared, public opinion and lingering suspicions about his involvement continued to haunt him. Struggling to find work and facing a relentless stigma, George attempted to rebuild his life while navigating the shadows cast by his wrongful conviction. His fight for compensation, however, brought additional challenges. The legal system denied him compensation on the grounds that no new evidence conclusively proved his innocence, a technicality that sparked public debate over the fairness and ethics of the justice process. George's story serves as a reminder of the toll that wrongful convictions can exact not only on those convicted, but on society's perception of justice. His case raised questions about the balance between convicting suspects and protecting individuals from wrongful prosecution, challenging the public to consider the lasting impacts of a flawed investigation and the consequences of judicial error. Despite the passage of years, Jill Dando's case has never faded from the public eye. Renewed interest surged as recent documentaries and media coverage revisited the case, sparking fresh theories and reigniting calls for justice. Many viewers and investigators continue to speculate, offering theories that range from new forensic possibilities to re examining overlooked connections and potential motives. Public sentiment has grown increasingly vocal, with advocates urging the police to reopen the investigation in light of advancements in forensic technology and insights gleaned from cold case methodologies. This renewed attention brings hope that perhaps, with time and technological progress, a breakthrough might be possible. Jill's murder remains one of Britain's most haunting mysteries, and the public's determination to see it solved reflects not only a desire for justice, but also a deeper curiosity about the case that shattered their trust in security and justice. Jill Dando's impact on British journalism went far beyond the stories she told. Her warmth, poise, and professionalism made her a beloved figure on national television, and her role on Crimewatch showcased her dedication to making the world safer. The tragic and unsolved nature of her death left a legacy intertwined with questions about the limits of forensic science, the fallibility of the justice system, and the public's enduring fascination with high profile mysteries. Her life and death stand as a poignant reminder of the complexities surrounding unsolved cases. In her memory, Jill's influence lives on in the form of charitable foundations, tributes, and ongoing interest in investigative journalism. Her case remains an open wound in the collective consciousness, a symbol of both loss and resilience as Britain continues to search for answers to the crime that took her life. More than 2 decades after her tragic death, Jill Dando's murder continues to haunt everyone connected to her case. Investigators who once sought answers now grapple with the lasting frustration of an unsolved mystery. Her family endures each new wave of media interest, and fans continue to cherish memories of her warmth and charm. With countless theories, suspects, and dead ends, the case remains one of Britain's most enduring and confounding mysteries. Jill's story leaves behind lingering questions that still echo in the minds of those who watched her report the news and solve crimes on Crimewatch. Yet the truth about her murder feels just out of reach, slipping away with each passing year. Will we ever discover what really happened on that quiet morning in April? The case remains open, but closure feels distant. If this story gripped you as it has so many others, consider sharing your theories or ideas in the comments. Could fresh perspectives help uncover clues that were once missed? Don't forget to subscribe to Crime Pulse Stories for more in depth explorations of unsolved cases and mysterious crimes as we continue our search for the truth, one story at a time.